You wake up before the sun. Your back is already sore, and the linen sheet beneath you is damp with sweat and sand. By the time you blink the crust from your eyes, a taskmaster is barking orderson, a language you don't speak, in a world that doesn't care if you do. Welcome to your first and probably last day as a slave in ancient Egypt. In this sleep-friendly journey through time, we'll explore what daily life was really like for the enslaved people of ancient Egypt. Forget the sanitized textbook version. We're diving into the mud pits, trudging through quarry dust, and peeling away the myth of pyramid-building nobility to uncover the brutal, relentless reality behind one of history's most iconic civilizations. This isn't just about suffrage, it's about survival, identity, and the limits of the human spirit. So get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's drift into a softer retelling of a very hard life. So, you think you're tough because you skipped breakfast and still made it to your 9 a.m. Zoom meeting? How adorable. Let's try something a little more old school. No yoga mat, no green juice, no safe word. You've just time traveled back to the late Bronze Age, and you've landed squarely in a society where your Fitbit won't count the 40,000 steps you're about to walk before noon. And here's the fun twist. You're not a visiting historian. You're not even a citizen. You're property. Congratulations. You're human capital in a civilization that's mastered architecture, astronomy, and the art of working people to death without the courtesy of calling it an internship. The day begins before Ra has even finished brushing his solar curls. You're shaken awake by someone with a stick and absolutely no patience. There's no snooze button, there's no breakfast in bed. What there is a crust of something that might be bread, or might be yesterday's bread, that got rained on and dried again into a shape that just barely doesn't qualify as a weapon. You're not even hungry. You're too nauseous from the smell of the straw bedding that has absorbed the sweat of 5 other men before you. No one explains anything, because no one has to. You are not a person who needs explanations. You are muscle. And muscle walks. By the time the horizon starts to glow, you're already stumbling toward the worksite with a crowd of other grumbling silhouettes. The silence is eerie. No birds. No small talk. Just sandals scraping dirt and the occasional cough that sounds like someone's lungs gave up years ago. You're wearing a rag that might have once been a tunic, but now serves mostly as sunburn prevention. Fashion isn't dead. It just got buried under the weight of carrying limestone blocks in 112-degree heat. There's a myth you might have heard that Egyptian slaves were well-fed, well-treated, and sang joyfully while stacking multi-ton bricks into celestial staircases. Those myths were probably written by the same kind of people who put "we're a family here" on job listings before handing you a mop and a 14-hour shift. No one here is singing. The only sounds are groans, grunts, and the rhythmic thud of a whip hitting someone else's back. Not hard enough to kill, but just enough to remind you why you haven't tried running away. You've seen what happens when someone tries. Your first assignment? Move that rock. Which one? That one. The one the size of your dreams and twice as heavy. You're expected to move it with nothing but a rope, your back, and the encouragement of a man whose idea of motivational speaking involves threats about removing body parts. You give it your all, because there's no alternative. Your arms shake, your legs buckle, and your soul begins negotiating terms of surrender with your spine. But you keep moving, because stopping is not an option. Not unless you're hoping to become part of the pyramid permanently. And here's the kicker. You're not even working on a pyramid. That job goes to skilled workers and conscripts. You're on latrine trench duty. That means digging, carrying, dumping, and repeating, all in a circle of misery that smells like ancient shame and raw onions. By midday, you're dreaming about death the way most people dream about retirement. Peaceful, quiet, with fewer flies. As the sun climbs higher, your skin sizzles like it's being punished for existing. You're not allowed water whenever you want it. You wait for it to be handed out in ladles, in amounts precisely calculated to keep you just barely alive. Hydration is rationed, and rest is a rumor. You keep moving because everyone else does. No one talks about hope here. No one needs to. Hope is dangerous. Hope gets people killed. You've been here less than a day, and already your modern sensibilities are in tatters. You miss deodorant. You miss socks. You miss the concept of basic human rights. And most of all, you miss being invisible. Because here, you're very visible, but only as a beast of burden. You begin to realize that in ancient Egypt, the pyramids were never the cruelest thing built. It was the system, the way it took your name, your future, your bones and made you thank it for the honor of participation. So yeah, you wouldn't last a day. And that's okay, because you were never meant to. This place, this life, this grinding wheel of endless labyrinth wasn't built for survival. It was built for eternity. And if you're lucky, your suffering might be mistaken for contribution. But probably not. You'll vanish into the sand, like all the others. Just another ghost in linen, forgotten by history but remembered by the stones. Congratulations! You're now an asset in the grand spreadsheet of the Pharaoh's divine enterprise. Don't get too excited. This isn't the kind of asset that comes with stock options or retirement plans. You are, in the very literal and legally binding sense, property. That means someone owns you the same way they own a plow or a donkey. Only you eat more and complain louder. You've got no last name, no legal protection, and the only benefit package you're eligible for is death, eventually. Maybe you thought being a cog in the capitalist machine was bad. Now you're a cog in a sand-choked death engine powered by salt bread and shouting. Welcome to the ultimate zero-hour contract, where 0 hours off is the norm. Ownership in ancient Egypt was a flexible concept, in the way a cage might flex slightly when the tiger inside rams into it. Some people were born into slavery, especially children of captives or debt slaves, whose parents didn't pay up in time. Others were prisoners of war foreigners dragged across the desert in chains after losing on the wrong side of a pharaoh's military flex. You? You probably offended the wrong noble, lost a bet, or were simply in the wrong place when a tax collector decided he needed an extra body to make his quota. Egypt didn't need a good reason to own you. It just needed you to stop asking questions. Your new title isn't citizen or worker. It's living tool. You're an extension of someone else's will. You are walked, fed, commanded, and punished like livestock, but without the affection people usually reserve for animals. At least a donkey gets petted sometimes. You get yelled at for breathing too loud. There's a record of slaves in official household inventories listed right after goats and before pottery. You're literally ranked somewhere between cheese storage and miscellaneous. What's especially charming is how the state viewed your existence, essential yet invisible. You build temples, row grain barges, dig irrigation canals, and push civilization forward one miserable footstep at a time, but no one writes your name down unless you screw up or die in an amusingly ironic fashion. The pharaoh might be praised as a living god, but you're the divine footstool keeping his sandals clean. And if you're lucky, someone might carve a generic thank you to the faithful laborers on a temple wall, while you rot in an unmarked grave 2 miles away with a brick still in your hand. Legally speaking, you have the same rights as a broom. If your master wants to sell you, he does. If he wants to trade you for a fishing net, that's a done deal. You could be gifted to a priest, donated to a temple, or reassigned to a quarry which is Egyptian bureaucrat. Speak for being worked until your bones snap like papyrus reeds. There's no trial, no defense, no appealing to the gods. The gods are busy hanging out with the elite, toasting wine, and watching you haul limestone in a kilt. Sometimes you get passed along through inheritance, which means you're a family heirloom now. Imagine being so unlucky that you're handed down from parent to child like a cursed teapot no one wants but everyone is obligated to keep. And this is the best-case scenario. Because if you're owned by the state, you're a public asset, which sounds noble until you realize it just means your suffering is managed by a bureaucracy that makes no distinction between building a tomb and digging a sewer. Even your body isn't really yours. If you're fit, you're sent to the fields or the construction yards. If you're strong, you go to the mines. If you're literate, and that's a big if, you might get promoted to be someone's assistant, a glorified notepad with legs. And if you're not good at anything, then you're still useful as an example. A warning, a lesson etched into other people's minds with a whip. So, no, you don't get a say in how you're treated, what you eat, or where you sleep. The only choices you make are how much of yourself to give before the day ends, and whether you'll scream when the lash hits or bite your tongue and save the breath for tomorrow. Your thoughts, your memories, your ambitions, they all slowly melt into the blistering mud of repetition. The only thing that's truly yours is the pain, and even that, if someone more important needs a demonstration, can be taken too. But here's the twisted part. For all this dehumanization, for all the ways you're turned into a thing instead of a person, your labor will outlast you. The stones you stack will stand for millennia. The carvings you polish will gleam in museum glass long after your name, if it was ever known, has been swallowed by sand. You are property. But in some dark, unforgiving way, you're also the foundation of civilization, built on your back, buried beneath your bones. Welcome to Pharaoh Incorporated. No exit interviews, no promotions, just eternity. Before the stars have even faded, the air shifts. It doesn't cool, it never truly cools, but it becomes less scorching, like the world is holding its breath before it starts cooking you alive again. That's your cue. The day begins not with a rooster's crow or a polite alarm, but with a wooden baton thudding against a wall, followed by shouting that translates loosely to "get up or be dragged." You rise, if you can call that pitiful movement rising. Everything hurts. You're sore in muscles you didn't even know you had. Your body's already developed that tired, resigned ache that comes from sleeping too lightly and too little for too long. But there's no time to stretch or complain, because the overseers aren't handing out participation trophies. They're handing out orders. Loudly. In bulk. You get a few moments to shove something edible into your mouth. If edible is being generous. It's a cold mash of grains and maybe crushed beans, barely warm, vaguely sour, definitely not Instagram-worthy. There's no time to sit. You eat squatting, surrounded by dozens of other barely functioning humans in various stages of despair and gastrointestinal rebellion. Someone nearby coughs wetly. You hope it's just the dust. It's never just the dust. The call comes again, harsh, guttural, practiced. The overseers have perfected the tone that implies violence without needing to demonstrate it. Yet, you shuffle out with the others, not so much walking as trudging forward in the collective gravitational pull of survival. No one talks. There's nothing to say that hasn't already been muttered, groaned, or cursed in 100 different ways. The only sounds are the crunch of sandals on dirt, the clink of tools, and the low background buzz of flies too stubborn to sleep. You pass the rows of huts, each one more decrepit than the last, the whole encampment smelling faintly of smoke, sweat, and things that should not be described before breakfast. Not that you'll have another meal anytime soon. The next feeding window is hours away, and even then, it's going to be the same bitter beer and flatbread combination that makes your stomach ache and your soul sigh. There's a reason you rarely see depictions of slaves smiling in ancient art. Nobody's thriving on a menu designed by sadists with a wheat surplus. As you make your way toward the work site, the sun begins its slow, malevolent crawl over the horizon. You used to think sunrises were beautiful. Now they're a countdown. Each minute adds another degree of heat to the already oppressive air. The light burns off the last hint of mercy from the sky, and before long, you're squinting into the fireball like a bug pinned under a magnifying glass. You wonder, briefly, if the gods are watching. And if they are, whether they find your suffering especially entertaining or merely background noise. When you reach the quarry, or the field, or the construction site honestly, it all blends together. You're assigned your task for the day. There's no ceremony, no briefing. A finger points, and that's where you go. You're handed tools that were old when your grandfather was born: blunt chisels, splintered handles, ropes so frayed they might be decorative. Your first task? Move sand. Or stone. Or more sand. On top of stone. It doesn't matter. The specifics are irrelevant when the outcome is always exhaustion. You want to pace yourself, but there's no such thing. The work is constant, the pace brutal. You sweat through your linen wrap within minutes. You blink grit from your eyes so often that you start to forget what clear vision even feels like. The labor isn't just physical, it's metaphysical, a kind of existential assault on your will to continue. Each action, each breath, is a negotiation with pain. You tell yourself you'll rest after the next haul, after the next trip. But you never do. There's no time for mercy, and no space for self-care. Your job is to keep moving until someone tells you to stopper, until your body does it for you. And always, always, there are the eyes. The overseers don't have to be shouting to be terrifying. Sometimes it's worse when they're quiet, watching, taking note. They know your breaking point better than you do. They've seen it happen hundreds of times, where the shuffle becomes a stumble, and the stumble becomes a fall, and the fall ends with someone being dragged away, limp, like yesterday's mistake. You don't want to be a mistake. So you push forward, gritting your teeth, not because you believe in anything, but because fear is still louder than fatigue. This is the wake-up call you never asked for. The ancient Egyptian version of the morning commute, except instead of a train, it's a death march, and instead of coffee, it's fermented grain sludge that doubles as hydration and punishment. And unlike your old job, there are no complaints departments, no HR, no one who will care if you vanish. If you're lucky, someone will remember your face. If you're really lucky, they won't. Because here, being remembered means someone still needs you, and needing means owning. And ownership, in this dust-choked sunrise of servitude, is the slow erosion of every part of you that ever hoped for more. Flatbread, onions, and beer. That's it. That's your menu. Not a menu. In the sense that you choose anything. Mind you, more like the list of options the universe has chosen for you and refuses to change no matter how nicely you starve. The bread is made from barley or emmer, depending on the era and whether the fields were generous or recently trampled by invaders. It's dense, heavy, and feels like it was baked by someone who resents your continued existence. The crust could double as a roofing tile. Inside? A chalky interior flecked with sand because the grinding stones aren't exactly precision instruments. You develop a tolerance for chewing rocks around day 5. The onions are pungent, raw, and occasional. Luxuries, really if you're lucky enough to be stationed near a temple or household that hasn't forgotten the spice of suffering. Lentils appear sometimes too, humble little beans that make your stomach lurch with joy before you remember they also make you gassy and there's no such thing as privacy in a labor camp. And then there's the beer. Don't let the word fool you. It's not golden, bubbly, or refreshing. Egyptian beer for the lower class is a thick, porridge-like brew that tastes like a barley farm, drowned in a puddle of regret. It's mildly alcoholic, sure, but not enough to help you forget your problems, just enough to convince you that maybe they don't matter as much as the immediate task of not collapsing. You slurp it, not sip. There is no etiquette, no pint glasses, just ladles and communal jars, and the quiet hope that today it won't taste like someone's foot. There's no meat unless you count the rumors. No sweets unless you find a wild date palm and somehow don't get beaten for loitering near it. And you can forget about clean water. Water gets fetched from the Nile, and while it technically qualifies as wet, it's also a soup of silt, microbes, and the occasional dead fish. You'd purify it if you had the time or equipment, but you don't, so you don't. Your stomach learns to accept, and your immune system evolves or it doesn't, and then it's just funeral rites and someone else eating your share. This diet is not designed for flavor, it's designed for functionality. Bare minimum sustenance to keep the body moving, and the brain barely alert enough to avoid falling under a cart. Nutritional value is a secondary concern to the question, will this prevent mass worker collapse before noon? The answer is usually yes, but just barely. And if you complain, that's cute. Slaves don't complain, they get replaced. You try not to envy the animals. The oxen get better feed. At least they have visible ribs and someone notices. Yours are hidden under grime and sunburn, so no one bothers. There's something uniquely humiliating about watching a donkey eat better than you, especially when it looks at you with pity, like it knows you used to be a person. And still, despite all this, you eat. You eat because you have to. Because fainting means punishment, and vomiting means you lose your rations. You eat because it fills the hollow silence inside you with something in thee that dulls the edge of waking life. You eat because survival doesn't care about flavor. It just wants compliance, one bite at a time. Now, let's talk about the pyramids, the most iconic symbols of ancient Egypt, and possibly the greatest architectural achievement to ever be built on the backs of people who couldn't spell architecture. There's this charming idea that they were built by teams of patriotic workers who volunteered out of national pride or religious devotion. That's adorable. Like thinking your company holiday party is a reward and not a strategic morale ploy with cheap wine. The reality? They were built by laborers, slaves, conscripts, and prisoners, people like you, who didn't exactly wake up and say, "You know what I want to do for the next 20 years? Move rocks that outweigh my regrets." These massive tombs weren't just construction projects. They were statements of divine power, permanence, and how many human lives you could spend like small change without losing sleep. Pharaohs needed monuments that screamed their greatness for eternity, and you, poor, exhausted, sunburnt, you were the exclamation point. The stone blocks used to build pyramids weighed tons. Tons. Each one dragged across sand and ramps with crude tools and raw muscle. That's right ramps. No pulleys, no forklifts, just ramps, logs, ropes, and your vertebrae, which pop and grind like cheap pottery every time you bend. You work in teams, but teamwork here means you all suffer simultaneously. The camaraderie is there, sure, in a trauma-bonded sort of way, but there's no room for slackers. If one person fails, the punishment is collective. The whip cracks on everyone's back until you start self-regulating. Motivation, through shared Terran ancient classic. You're told it's an honor to contribute to something eternal, that this is your part in the grand story of divine kings and the afterlife. That's like being told it's noble to be the ladder rung someone else climbs on to reach heaven. Spoiler, you don't get to come along. And don't forget the environment. You're not just hauling stones, you're doing it in the heat, in the dust, in a place where the sun feels like it wants to peel the skin off your bones and wear it as a souvenir. You don't get breaks. You get pauses that last exactly long enough to remind you how tired you are. Water is rationed. Injuries are ignored. You watch your coworkers collapse. Sometimes, permanently. And then you step around them and keep going because you don't want to be next. But the real kicker? When the pyramid is done, there's no ceremony for you. No plaque, no name carved in limestone, not even a mention in the records unless it's to note how many people died during construction. You don't get buried inside. That's reserved for royalty, sealed in chambers with gold, food, and elaborate spells. You're dumped in the sand outside the workers' camp, wrapped in whatever cloth wasn't already needed to patch a tent. And yet, when people gaze up at the pyramids today, they marvel, they whisper, they take photos. They call them wonders. And they forget that each stone is mortared with sweat, blood, and the final breath of someone who never had a choice. History remembers the names of kings. The rest of us just become the dust between their footprints. You're handed your tools for the day with all the ceremony of being tossed leftovers from a banquet you weren't invited to. First comes the chisel. It's dull. Not metaphorically, it's literally so worn down you could chew stone faster. The edge is blunted from months of carving into unforgiving limestone, and it's never been sharpened properly because sharpening takes time and resources, and you, tragically, are neither of those things. Then there's the mallet, which is less a mallet and more a lump of wood tied to a stick with some ancient optimism. Its handle is splintered, its weight uneven, and the moment you pick it up, you feel like you've just inherited a family curse disguised as a tool. There's a rope, too. It frays when you look at it. It's meant to drag things, stones, carts, broken bodies, whatever the taskmasters have in mind. It was probably once strong, new, maybe even sacred. Now it looks like the kind of thing you wouldn't trust to hold your laundry, let alone half a granite block. And yet, you'll be trusting your life to it for the next 14 hours. There's no gear, no gloves to protect your hands from blistering, no boots with steel toes, no back support, just your willpower, and the distinct feeling that your spine is about to file for separation. You work barehanded, with palms that haven't felt soft since childhood, and fingernails that have become purely decorative. Every time you swing your mallet, you send a jolt up your arm. Your joints rattle. Your shoulders scream. Your entire skeletal system files a silent complaint that will never be acknowledged by management. You are not paid to be comfortable. You are not even paid. You are a resource, and the tools you're given reflect that level of care enough to function, never enough to thrive. As for safety measures, the ancient Egyptians had a very advanced system. Try not to die. That was it. No helmets. No goggles. No signs saying watch your step, because if you weren't watching your step, you'd already be face down in rubble, possibly under a block someone else dropped. You learn to move like pry eyes scanning, legs bracing, always a second away from flinching. The injuries come quickly. A crushed toe, a split lip, a fractured wrist. You wrap it in cloth, grit your teeth, and keep going. Because the only treatment is surviving until your body forgets it hurts. And when you ask for a better tool, a sharper chisel, maybe a rope that hasn't already been chewed by mice and time, you're met with silence, or laughter, or worse, a story about how someone managed with even less. In my day, they'll say, as if ancient Egypt was a chain of increasingly terrible internships, and you're the latest generation of suckers learning the hard way. You don't ask again. You use what you're given. You adapt. You bleed a little less each day. Eventually, the tools feel like extensions of your suffering familiar, cruel, and reliable in their indifference. And then, just when you've gotten used to the ritual of smashing rock with half-broken sticks, they change your assignment. You're not just working with tools today. You're moving blocks. Giant ones. The kind of blocks that would make a modern forklift wheeze and file for retirement. You're told to help drag one from the quarry to the pyramid site. It's just you and 50 other equally miserable souls, lined up like cursed ants, pulling a boulder across a hellish sandbox. The rope bites into your shoulder. Your feet dig into sand that gives no traction. Every step feels like a cruel joke played by physics and fate, and through it all, the sun watches, bored and boiling, as if daring you to stop. Welcome to the construction zone. You thought building a pyramid would be glamorous? A mystical journey? It's just sweat, noise, and gravity trying to kill you in slow motion. You're assigned a team, which isn't a team, so much as a collection of bodies arranged around a shared task and mutual loathing. You don't know anyone's name, but you know their groans. You know their breaking point. You know which ones will drop first. It's a race against collapse, and everyone's losing. There's no fancy scaffolding here. No pulley systems. Just inclined ramps made from mud and determination, designed to help you push thousands of pounds up a slope that defies logic and kindness. The ramps crumble, the bricks crack, and when things break, which they often do, it's your job to fix it. Not tomorrow. Now. With the same tools that just failed you. Every mistake is a delay, and every delay is punished. Not metaphorically. Physically. Your hands are raw. Your knees buckle. Your back screams in a language you've long stopped understanding. And when you finally reach the top of the ramp and place the stone exactly, precisely, no margin for error, you don't celebrate. You don't high-five. You just turn around, drag the rope back down, and start again, because that wasn't the last block. It wasn't even close. You have hundreds more to go, thousands. An endless procession of toil, measured in bone fractures and silent tears. You don't question why you're doing this. You already know. You're doing it because someone richer and holier decided their soul deserves a stairway to eternity, and your soul, well, your soul can be used to build it. You're part of a grand vision. Not the architect, not even the blueprint, just the scaffolding that's never mentioned once the building is done. And if you drop dead halfway through, they'll step over you. Your spot filled before the dust settles. The stone doesn't care who lays it. It only cares that it's laid. And you? You care only enough to keep going, one blistered step at a time, until the gods or the heat finally decide you've had enough. There's a man who watches you work. Always. He doesn't smile. He doesn't blink much, either. His job is simple. Make sure you don't slow down, slack off, or accidentally start thinking you're something other than expendable. This man is your overseer. And if there were ancient Egyptian trading cards for most hated figures, he'd be in every deck. Not because he's cruel for fun, though some are, but because cruelty is literally in his job description. The whip he carries isn't decorative. It's not symbolic. It's practical, tested, and applied liberally. You work faster not because you believe in the project, but because you believe in pain, and you've learned that he delivers it with swift, artistic efficiency. He doesn't need to shout often because his presence does the talking. He walks the line, scanning the crew with eyes sharpened by years of weeding out the weak. He knows who's about to faint before they do. He knows who has an injury they're hiding and who's thinking of doing something stupid, like taking a longer break or leaning on a shovel. And when he finds them, when he finds you, he doesn't even raise his voice. Just a look, a slight nod, and the message is clear. Don't be the reason I get bored today. His management style is what you'd call aggressively motivational. If he were writing self-help scrolls, they'd be titled, "Whip First, Ask Questions Never." He is not a man you can negotiate with. There's no workplace mediation, no grievance process, no middle manager to complain to when your taskmaster threatens to grind your bones to mortar, which, by the way, is a figure of speech you're no longer entirely sure is metaphorical. He sees you as a unit of effort, not of emotion. Crying? Save it. He's seen better tears from donkeys. Limping? Walk it off. And if you collapse entirely, he won't yell. He'll just step around you, find your replacement, and leave your still warm body as a cautionary tale for everyone else. But even he is part of the machinery, a cog slightly higher in the gearworks of misery. You wonder, sometimes, if he was once like you, just a laborer, beaten down enough times that he clawed his way up the ladder with a club and a scowl. If so, then this is what promotion looks like. A little more authority, a lot more resentment, and the power to punish instead of being punished. It's a cycle older than stone. Break enough spirits, and eventually someone hands you the whip. And speaking of things that reek of cycles and eternal punishment, let's talk sanitation. Or, more accurately, the total and unrepentant lack of it. Welcome to the fragrant underbelly of ancient labor camps, where the concept of cleanliness is mostly aspirational, and the reality is a constant olfactory assault. There are no toilets here, not in the way you understand them. There are designated relief pits scattered at the edge of camp, sunken trenches full of things no trench should ever be full of, baking slowly under the relentless sun. They're shared by everyone: humans, flies, and whatever semi-domesticated creatures have wandered too close for their own good. These pits are not drained or cleaned. They are simply dug deeper when they fill, and they do fill alarmingly fast. The stench is unbearable. It wafts across the camp like a plague on the wind, seeping into fabrics, hair, food, and dreams. You try to breathe through your mouth, but then you taste it, and you wish you hadn't. You try to hold your breath, but then you pass out, and that's even worse. Everyone smells. Every surface smells. You smell. It's not a question of hygiene anymore. It's a question of survival. You learn to live in it, to filter it out the way you do with pain and hopelessness. It becomes a background note in the symphony of squalor. Bathing? Ha. Sure. The Nile is there, but you're not exactly clocking out early to go splash around in sacred waters. Your only chances to clean yourself come when the crew is taken down to the river for mass washing once a week, if you're lucky, and even then, it's more about washing the filth off your body so the overseers don't have to smell you while yelling. The river itself is questionable at best. You wash upstream, cattle drinks downstream, and someone probably died somewhere in between. You scrub with sand because there's no soap. You rinse in water that glimmers with things you try not to identify. Then you get out and dry in the same sun that cooks your skin during work, your body streaked with dried mud and regret. There's no laundry. Clothes are worn until they disintegrate. You sleep in them, sweat in them, bleed in them. You do everything in them. Eventually, they just become part of your skin. New fabric is for the living elite or the freshly buried. You'll get a new wrap when you're dead, not before. Your bedding is straw or a mat if you're lucky, the ground if you're not. Rats and insects are standard company, and the concept of disinfectant is a distant fantasy, like justice or cold water. And yet, somehow, you carry on. You squat beside the trench with practiced indifference. You pretend not to notice the person next to you. You learn to gauge the wind direction before relieving yourself, so the stink doesn't immediately slap you back into consciousness. You adapt. You accept. You survive not because it's noble, but because it's the only thing you're still allowed to do. The filth becomes part of your world, as inescapable as the sun and the lash. And every breath you take that doesn't make you gag feels like a small, foul victory over the gods of waste and despair. Personal hygiene in ancient Egypt was, in theory, a matter of great cultural pride. The wealthy oiled their bodies, perfumed their wigs, and exfoliated with fine sands like early-day influencers obsessed with spiritual cleansing and looking good in papyrus portraits. But you? You're not wealthy. You're barely even considered human. Your hygiene routine consists of sweating profusely for 16 hours a day, rolling in sand that gets everywhere, and maybe, if the stars align and nobody important needs you at that moment, stumbling into the Nile for a rinse that doubles as a ritual drowning. You bathe like someone trying to scrub off existential despair with river silt and call it a victory. The idea of feeling clean is as foreign to you as free time or parental affection. And soap? That's for people who get to sit down to eat, not squat in a ditch holding half a raw onion like it's a feast. There's no soap, no shampoo, no toothbrush. Your body odor is your name tag. It walks ahead of you, announces your arrival, and lingers long after you leave. You start smelling like your work. Acrid, dusty, sun-cooked labor, mixed with stale beer and the faint floral suggestion of defeat. And don't think you're alone. Everyone around you stinks, too. It's a communal misery, a miasma of mutual decay. You learn to stop noticing it, or at least pretend to. You get used to the smell of your own body, giving up one pore at a time. It becomes the scent of survival. Your clothes, if you can still call them that, haven't been washed since you were issued them, probably from the rag pile of a previously deceased laborer. They stick to you like regret. Any sort of grooming is DIY, with whatever rocks or sharp fragments are available. You've seen people try to pluck body hair with chipped flint, not because they care about appearances, but because the lice are out of control. Shaving your head? Practical, not stylish. Long hair means more places for insects to hide, and when you sleep on straw soaked in sweat, rats, and time, infestations are more reliable than breakfast. Your fingernails are jagged, black with dirt. Your feet are swollen, cracked, and calloused like the ground you walk on. Blisters rise and pop and heal and rise again. Your skin peels in sheets, sunburned and scratched raw by sand and stones. You're constantly crusted with layers of your own labradoried sweat, quarry dust, blood from cuts that never properly close. And when you itch, which is always, you try not to think about why. You scratch and hope it's just dryness, not something that crawls. There are no mirrors. You don't know what you look like anymore. You're vaguely aware of having a face, but it's less of an identity and more of a functional surface from which sounds and sweat emerge. Occasionally, you'll see your reflection in the Nile, distorted by ripples and the carcass of a fish floating past, and you'll wonder when your eyes started looking so hollow. The answer, of course, is day 3. That's when the sparkle left, replaced by the dull glaze of someone who now views dust as a personal seasoning. And then, there's the toll. The real toll. The toll no one mentions in hieroglyphs. The daily, merciless wearing down of your physical form until you're a walking injury kit held together by muscle memory and spite. Your body breaks in increments, quietly, strategically. It doesn't just fall apart one day. It erodes. It weakens from within. Your back, once straight, begins to hunch. Not because you're old, but because the weight of stone, shame, and repetition pulls you downward, day after day, like gravity's revenge on hubris. Your feet are the first to go. They blister, they crack, they bleed. Every step feels like you're walking on hot graveland, sometimes you are. There's no rest, no cushioned sandals or padded insoles, just woven reed shoes, if you're lucky, or bare soles cooked in the sun. Your hands follow, they swell. The skin splits, the calluses build like armor, but armor still bruises. Your knuckles are perpetually swollen, your grip weak. Every tool you pick up feels like it's laughing at the very idea of you being functional. Your joints scream by midday. Your shoulders throb from lifting, pulling, hauling. Your elbows ache from repetition. Your knees buckle unpredictably. Pain becomes your coworker, the only one who sticks around. It doesn't leave. It just finds new parts of you to colonize. And still, you move. Because if you stop, someone will shout. If you collapse, someone will beat you. And if you disappear, someone else will take your place, without question or pause. Injuries don't heal here. Not properly. There's no rest period. No bandages, unless someone cuts the linen off a corpse. You wrap wounds in dirty cloth, hope the bleeding stops, and pray the infection isn't ambitious. You know a man who sliced his foot open on a shard of limestone. He worked on it for 4 days until the swelling got so bad he couldn't put on his sandal. They carried him out one morning. No one asked where. Everyone knew. You stop hoping to feel better. You just hope to not feel worse. You begin measuring your health in terms of how tolerable your limp is today versus yesterday. You start to think that maybe you were made for this, because if not, why are you still standing? And that's the cruel trick. The more your body breaks, the more you accept it. You forget how you used to feel. You forget what pain-free meant. You adapt to the ache. You internalize the damage. It becomes normal. And when something new breaks, you barely flinch. Because broken is the new baseline. It's the only constant you can rely on. You, the tools, and the pain. Until one day, you hear your bones creak, your heart stutter, and you realize that normal has finally caught up to you. And there's no going back. When you die, it's not an event, it's not a tragedy, it's an adjustment in the labor roster. There is no ceremony, no mourning, no pause in the schedule to acknowledge that a human being has just exited the grueling, sun-scorched theater of suffering known as your job. Instead, your body is dragged to the side if someone has Timor, more often, left where it fell until the shift ends and someone steps over it, muttering something that sounds suspiciously like, "Not my problem. There are no rights. No one sings. No one cries." At best, a few of the guys might grunt in your general direction before going back to hauling limestone under the gaze of an overseer who already forgot your name. You don't even get a grave, not really. If you're lucky, you'll be dumped in a shallow pit, covered hastily with sand to keep the jackals off. If not, the vultures will get to you before anyone else. Your final resting place? A construction site. Congratulations. Your eternal legacy is being part of a foundation. Not metaphorically, literally. They might even use your bones to reinforce the ramp. Think of it as contributing to architecture with your skeleton. And here's the kicker. Your death is logged, if at all, as a number. One less body in the workforce. No one will carve your name into a stele. There will be no statue, no papyrus scroll gently mourning your contribution to the state. Pharaohs get tombs. You get silence. The system doesn't waste time on the dead. The living are barely maintained as it is. Your replacement will be in position before rigor mortis sets in, handed your tools with a grunt and a nod, already sweating through their tunic by the time anyone notices your blood on the stones. This is the part they don't tell you in the history books, that the true miracle of ancient engineering wasn't the design, or the mathematics, or the logistics. It was the sheer volume of human suffering absorbed into each block. The pyramids are wonders not because they lasted, but because so many died building them, and no one bothered to remember a single name. You don't get a legacy. You get erased. And even your erasure is unimportant to everyone but the flies. And don't go thinking you'll catch a break with holidays or rest days. Sure, there are festivals. They sound nice on papyrus. Days of celebration, offerings to the gods, public rituals with music and dancing. You imagine this will be your chance to breathe, maybe drink something stronger than beer paste, maybe even sit down without a taskmaster pacing like a shark in sandals. But that illusion lasts about 5 seconds, because guess who gets to clean up after the celebration? Who hauls the offerings? Who sets up the decorations, erects the poles, digs the pits for roasted oxen, and then scrubs the vomit and ash from the stone courtyards after the noblemen have finished worshipping themselves? You? The slave. The one who doesn't get to celebrate, but is somehow always invited to the part where your back is involved. Your rest day turns into double labor. Because now you're not just moving blocks, you're sweeping, cooking, hauling, and disposing of whatever unholy combination of leftovers and sacrificial remains the priests leave behind. You get to carry jars twice your weight, run errands you don't understand, and get yelled at for walking too slow in the presence of a divine goat. The air smells like incense and burnt meat, and none of it is for you. You're the background figure, the one who holds up the canopy or drags away the carcass once the prayers are done. You are invisible when the nobles are speaking, but somehow hypervisible when there's work to be done. And the worst part is, for just a moment, you get a glimpse of what it means to rest. You see the feasts. You smell the food meat, honeyed bread, beer that doesn't taste like grain vomit. You hear laughter, songs, even joy. You see people reclining on cushions, fanned by servants who probably hate them but at least aren't covered in quarry dust. And in that flicker of a moment, your brain dares to feel envy. Not because you believe you deserve it, but because you can't remember the last time someone looked happy and it wasn't a hallucination from heat stroke. Then someone shouts your name or what they think your name is, and you're back in motion, back to lifting, dragging, scrubbing. The festival becomes just another kind of torment, more elaborate and perfumed, but torment nonetheless. By the end of it, you're more exhausted than on a regular workday, but somehow more hollow too, because you saw what life could be. If only you were born into a different body, a different class, a different story, but you weren't. You were born into dust, into servitude, into labor without end. So you don't get holidays. You get hope dangled in front of you like a date on a string, then yanked away the moment you reach for it. And still, you keep going. Because what else is there? Rest is a myth. A carrot on a stick made of limestone. And you're the mule too tired to stop walking. If you get hurt, and you will, it's not treated like a problem. It's treated like an inconvenience. Not to you, of course, to everyone else. You being injured is a disruption in the flow of labor, a clog in the great, grinding machinery of Egyptian ambition. You don't get sympathy. You don't get a break. You get a sharp look from the overseer, and a reminder that bandages don't grow on trees, and time is for the living. Whatever pain you're in, you're expected to carry it with dignity, which here means quietly, without complaint, and ideally out of sight. The less your suffering is visible, the less anyone has to pretend to care. Medical treatment in your world is the stuff of myth. Priests and physicians might offer elaborate rituals and ointments for the rich honey, resin, maybe a chant or two, but you? You get whatever someone can smear on your wound, while keeping one eye on their workload. Honey is actually considered a legitimate antiseptic, but good luck getting your hands on it when the temple kitchens are reserving it for offering pastries and embalming the elite. If you're lucky, someone might spit on the wound and tell you to walk it off. And you'll do it, not because you think it'll help, but because you don't have another choice. You've seen what happens to people who sit down and don't get back up. Eventually, they're part of the scenery. Broken bones are especially fun. There's no casting, no braces, just awkward splinting with whatever sticks or linen scraps you can scavenge without being accused of theft. And you better heal straight, because no one's adjusting that for you later. Infection is practically expected. Your tools are filthy. Your clothes are filthy. You are, in every measurable way, a walking bacteria farm. Cuts fester, bruises deepen. You begin to memorize the different shades of your skin as it moves through the various stages of healing and decay. You name your blisters like roommates because they stay with you longer than most people. There's a kind of folk medicine you might hear whispered among the other laborers' charms, herbs, prayers to obscure deities who might specialize in mercy for the desperate. But these are more about comfort than cure. Something to hold on to when your fever spikes and your limbs shake, and you realize you're either going to get better on your own or get worse until you stop getting up. And when you do stop getting up, the healers don't come. The overseer does, to see whether you can be salvaged or swapped out. If not, someone else gets your tools, and your place, and your spot in line for the honey that never came. Legal rights? That's rich. The very phrase suggests a structure where fairness exists, where you could appeal a decision or report abuse. But here's the reality. The law is written in stone, and not one word of it was carved for you. It's for the property owners, the nobles, the priests, the ones who have names that matter. You're not a citizen. You're not even a subject. You're a body with function, a number, a statistic with a heartbeat. If something is done to you, if you're beaten, robbed, or worse, you don't go to court. You don't get a hearing. You get silence. Maybe a laugh. Maybe another beating for wasting someone's time. Try running. Just try it. Not that you'd get farther's desert in every direction and patrols who know exactly how far a desperate man can run before dehydration does the job for them. But let's say you do it anyway. You slip away during a moment of chaos. The second you're cautioned, you will be caught, you'll be punished in front of everyone, publicly, loudly. Not for the sake of justice, but for the message it sends. Stay in line, remember your place. The punishment, various lashes, branding, even mutilation. Something visible, something that scars. Not just your body, but the collective memory of everyone watching. Talking back? That's a gamble you only make once. If the wrong person hears you being insolent, you're marked. Not officially, because again, you don't warrant official documentation. But word spreads. You get fewer rations, harsher assignments, extra eyes watching, waiting for an excuse. You learn quickly that silence is survival. Obedience isn't loyalty, it's insurance. And hope? Hope is dangerous. Hope leads to rebellion. And rebellion is a luxury for those who have something left to lose. Even breathing wrong feels like an act of defiance. You don't cough near an overseer. You don't sigh too loudly. You don't raise your eyes unless summoned. Every gesture is calculated, every word measured. Your behavior isn't about respect. It's about minimizing harm. The system you're in doesn't need your voice. It needs your hands, your legs, your spine. And when those fail, it needs your replacement. The only law that applies to you is the law of endurance. If you last, you live. If you don't, you become a lesson. In this life, the only right you truly have is the right to keep going. As long as you serve a function, you're allowed to exist. Step out of line, and the system reminds you exactly how little you matter. You are not protected by law. You are contained by it. And in that containment, you learn the rules of survival. Stay quiet. Stay moving. Stay useful. And above all, stay invisible. Because invisibility, in this place, is the closest thing to freedom you'll ever have. In the grand pyramid of society, you're not at the bottom. That would suggest you're at least holding something up. No, you're the dirt it's buried in. You're the rung on the ladder that no one sees because it's covered in mud and desperation. Even the goat herderies, the guy whose full-time job is to follow goats around and stop them from walking into Thingshaw's more social capital than you, He might sleep on a mat instead of the floor. He might get invited to family meals. He might even own a piece of a goat. You? You don't own the rag tied around your waist. You are less than the sum of your body parts. You are function stripped of form, effort without recognition. Even the children of market vendors look at you with the kind of pity usually reserved for injured animals and dropped bread. There are slaves who work inside the house servants with names, roles, sometimes even a whisper of status. Not you. Your field crew, quarry trash, dust-soled and sun-scorched. You haul, dig, sweat, bleed, and vanish. There's no upward mobility, no promotions, no proving yourself. The social ladder doesn't descend low enough to touch you. You are locked in a caste so invisible that people build homes on your labor and never once ask who carved the stones. If you had a name, it's been forgotten. If you had a family, they've been scattered like ash in the wind. Your life isn't even measured in years, it's measured in bricks, in loads carried, in the number of dawns you've survived under a whip's shadow. The few freedoms you do have are laughably grim. You're free to collapse when no one's looking. You're free to imagine what it would be like to lie down in the Nile and just keep floating. You're free to mutter curses under your breath in a dialect no one else remembers, because it's the only language that still belongs to you. But even that gets risky. If someone hears you say the wrong thing, it's over. You're not a threat, just a reminder that discontent exists. And reminders are disposable. And so you keep your head down. You perform humility like it's a second skin. You nod when spoken to, bow when ordered, and blend into the labor force like one more shadow in a world already too full of them. You don't dream of greatness. You dream of neutrality, of being ignored. Because attention is a spotlight, and under that light, things burn. Better to be beneath notice than under scrutiny. Better to be part of the ground than part of the story, because stories require characters, and you were never granted that luxury. The only ones who don't judge you are the crocodiles. Down by the riverbanks, when the overseers look the other way, you sometimes wander just close enough to see them sunning themselves, half submerged, half asleep, eyes glinting with prehistoric indifference. They don't care who you are. They don't care where you're from. They'd eat a nobleman the same way they'd eat you efficiently and without ceremony. There's an honesty in that. A certain purity in the idea that, for once, your social status doesn't matter. To them, you're just meat. And strangely, it feels comforting. You begin to assign them names, not out loud. Of course, that would be too dangerous. But in your head, you recognize them. That long, scarred one that drifts silently through the reeds. You call him Osiris not because he's a god of the dead, but because he looks like he's already halfway there. The fat one with a crooked jaw? That's Bidey. Bidey's seen things. You and Bidey share a kind of mutual respect, built entirely on imaginary conversations and mutual silence. You start to imagine what it would be like to be one of them. To lie in the sun all day, no tasks, no tools, no overseers. To only move when you feel like it, and when you move, it's terrifying. Sometimes, in the rare moments when your body isn't screaming and your mind isn't too fogged by heat and hunger, you sit by the river's edge and watch them glide through the water like they own it. And in a way, they do. You build temples for gods you'll never meet, but the crocodile's real, present, unbothered feel more divine than anything carved in gold. They kill, yes, but they do it with clarity. Not out of cruelty, not for efficiency, but simply because that's what they do. There's no manipulation, no hierarchy, no illusion of fairness, just hunger and movement. It makes sense in a way that your life never has. You begin to envy them, not their teeth or their scales or their immunity to sunburn, but their freedom. They don't worry about schedules. They don't get whipped for moving too slowly. They aren't replaced if they falter. They exist, fully and unapologetically, in their space. And that's all you've ever wanted to exist, without apology. To take up space, without fear. To be something other than replaceable. But you're not a crocodile. You're a slave. And tomorrow, Bitey will still be in the water, sunning himself, while you'll be back in the quarry, dragging stones that don't care how tired you are. Still, it helps. Just a little. To have that moment of connection, even if it's imagined. To look into the eye of a creature older than the kingdom itself, and feel seen not as a worker, or a tool, or a problem, but as something alive, you know it won't last. The day always comes, the heat always returns, and the overseers always shout. But in the quiet minutes between, when the air is still and the river doesn't stink too badly, you sit with your crocodiles and remember that the world is bigger than your chains. That somewhere, beneath the hierarchy, beneath the labor, beneath the bruises and blisters and the weight of forgotten dreams, there is still a sliver of something whole inside you, something untamed, something ancient. And that, even in bondage, might just be enough to keep going. You used to dream of being a scribe. The thought almost makes you laugh now, if your mouth weren't too dry and cracked from days of thirst and silence. Back then, back when your hands were still soft and your future still yours, the idea of holding a reed pen instead of a hauling rope was intoxicating. You pictured yourself in clean linen, seated in the shade of a palace archive, dipping your quill into pots of soot-black ink, transcribing royal decrees and temple records while being served cool drinks by people who actually smiled. You imagined your name carved on clay tablets, remembered not for your labor, but for your words. Maybe you'd even compose a hymn or two, something the priests would read aloud in candlelight, your syllables echoing through eternity. Now, the only script you know is the scrape of stone on skin and the groan of bones at dawn. Your hands, once maybe good for writing, are calloused and cracked, thick with dust and scar tissue. You couldn't hold a reed pen if you tried it would snap between your fingers or slip from your grip, slick with sweat. Your vocabulary has changed too. You don't think in verses anymore. You think in commands: lift, push, don't stop, move faster. You think in units of pain, in steps, between rest breaks, in the counting of seconds as the sun claws across the sky like a cruel god pulling you toward heat stroke. So, you've stopped dreaming about writing. Your imagination has adapted like everything else. Now you dream about smaller things, things that feel almost possible, like not stepping on a scorpion, like a piece of flatbread without sand in it, like a night without groaning in your sleep from injuries you can't remember getting. Sometimes, when your body forgets itself in the flicker of exhaustion, you dream of silence steep, endless silence. Not the quiet of sleep, but of absence, of finally not being here. You wake from those dreams with the weight of disappointment pressing down heavier than any block you've lifted, because you woke up. Again. And the stone is still waiting. You start measuring your dreams not by what they contain, but by how far they pull you from this place. The best ones are the ones you can't remember, the ones that leave only a soft echo in your chest, like someone once whispered a name you've forgotten but still miss. But most nights, your dreams are just reruns of your waking life. Moving stone, sweating, falling, the overseer's voice distorted into something monstrous. Sometimes your own voice, begging for mercy you know will never come. Even in sleep, you can't escape the job. Your subconscious has unionized with your exhaustion, and all your fantasies now come with sand in your eyes and sun in your throat. Still, when you pass the temples, the ones you help build, clean, maintain you feel something. Not reverence, not pride, not awe, just recognition. These monuments, these vast, echoing spaces carved out of the rock like tombs for gods, they carry the weight of your suffering in every polished column. You look at the walls, the reliefs, the intricately carved scenes of divine battles and celestial order, and you know that someone, just like you, carved those lines. Not a priest, not a noble, a worker. A man with splinters in his palms and dust in his lungs, guided by sketches he couldn't read, carving meaning for a God he'd never see. It hits you sometimes, the absurdity of it all. These grand temples, built by those who weren't even allowed to enter them freely. You clean the floors with the same rags you use to wipe your face, and the statues you polish with your sweat stare down at you like they own your soul. You know their names: Amun, Ra, Isis, Horus. You speak them under your breath like a child afraid of being heard. But you also know the names of the men who died beside you, and those names don't get carved into stone. They vanish in the wind. In the same gusts that erode the temple facades you were told would last forever. You wonder what eternity really means. To the gods, it's carved in granite. To you, it's a stretch of time so long it swallows hope whole. The irony is not lost on you that these temples, symbols of cosmic balance and divine justice, are built with the blood and backs of the utterly forsaken. The walls depict kings receiving blessings, gods descending in glory. They don't depict you, crouched in the corner with a split lip, praying no one notices you're too tired to stand. They don't show your friend who slipped from the scaffolding and was quietly buried at the edge of camp without a word. They don't show the long lines of you, tools in hand, dragging the divine into existence while your own existence disappears inch by inch. And yet, you touch the stone. You run your fingers along the carved surfaces and feel the echo of effort. Not glory, effort. The human cost fossilized in limestone. You press your hand to it and think, maybe, this is what memory feels, like not the kind they write down, but the kind that lives in the texture of things. You think about how many of these monuments will survive long after your bones are dust, and you wonder if someone, someday, will ever ask who shaped them. Not whose idea they were, not whose face is on the walls, but who actually did the work, who bled in the cracks, who buried his dreams beneath a wall that would outlive him by thousands of years. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe memory is a luxury, like clean clothes or rest. Maybe your legacy is the silence you leave behind, stitched into every surface you touched. Maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Or maybe it isn't. Either way, tomorrow you'll be back at it, carving someone else's eternity while your own slips away, unmarked and unnamed, like every dream you used to believe in. The desert doesn't care about your pain. It doesn't care about your past or your name or the brittle little hopes you keep tucked inside your ribs. It stretches out in every direction, indifferent, endless, whispering nothing but wind and heat and sand. And after enough days, after enough years, if you last that long, you begin to understand that this place isn't just where you work. It's where you become something else. You begin to dissolve into it, cell by cell. The grit in your hair, the sun in your blood, the dryness in your throw-at-its, not just part of the landscape, it's part of you. You stop feeling like a man. You start to feel like a shadow that moves only when ordered, like dust with bones. At first, you try to resist it. You hold on to the small things that remind you who you were, the way your mother used to comb your hair, the way your brother used to laugh when you couldn't carry a jug of water without spilling it. But those memories blur over time. The sun bleaches them out of you. The sand grinds them down. Eventually, you're not even sure if those memories are real or just comforting lies your brain made up to help you survive. The line between dream and memory fades. What remains is the routine. Wake, haul, sweat, ache, repeat. No names, no past, just motion. And yet, somewhere in the rhythm of it all, you begin to hear something else. Not words, not sounds, exactly, but whispers. The kind that come when your body is too tired to fight and your mind starts drifting sideways. It's in the wind that whistles over the dunes, in the hush of stone being dragged across sand, in the shuffle of feet marching in sync. It's like the desert is speaking not with a voice, but with a presence, a subtle, ancient murmur that says, I see you. I've seen all of you, and I will bury every last one of you. It's not a threat. It's just a promise. Time stops working the way it used to. There are no hours, no minutes, just light and dark, heat and chill. You don't remember what day it is. You don't remember how many days it's been. The sun rises, the work begins, and that's all the calendar you need. The desert watches it all, unblinking. The sand shifts beneath your feet like it's breathing, and you swear you've stepped in the same spot 1,000 times. Maybe you have. Maybe the entire landscape is just a loop you've been stuck in since the gods first decided labor was holy. But even in this vast, silent world of repetition, something stirs. Not rebellion, not really, more like a flicker. A tiny, stubborn pulse of awareness that hasn't been crushed out yet. A sideways glance when the overseer's back is turned. A shared look with another laborer as the sun sinks behind the cliffs, and for just a moment, you both remember that this isn't how it's supposed to be. You were supposed to be more than this. There's nothing overt, nothing stupid, just a pause in the motion, a stillness that says, I know. That's your act of rebellion. Stillness. You steal moments when you can, a breath held a second longer than you're allowed, a stretch that lingers past the count of 5. You close your eyes for a heartbeat and imagine you're somewhere else. Not in the city, not in another job. Somewhere without a name. Somewhere soft. It doesn't matter if it's real. The fantasy is enough. Because in that one quiet moment, you aren't a slave. You aren't a number. You aren't a body. You're just a person, breathing under the stars, trying to remember what it feels like to belong to yourself. The overseers don't notice most of these moments. They're not trained to look for stillness. They're trained to look for movement, for disobedience, for things that break the rhythm. But stillness true, internal stillness is invisible to them. It slips past their gaze like a breeze. It's your secret, your shield. You don't have the power to fight, but you do have the power to be still. And that, somehow, becomes its own kind of resistance. You start to notice others doing it too. Not talking, not planning, just pausing, just resisting the grind in the smallest, most human way possible. An old man who lets his eyes linger on the horizon a second too long. A young woman who traces shapes into the sand with her toe during break. A boy who hums a tune his mother taught him, too quietly for anyone to scold. These aren't protests, they're prayers. Tiny, stubborn rituals of memory and defiance, scattered like seeds across a landscape that was never meant to grow anything but sorrow. And maybe nothing will come of it. Maybe these small rebellions will die unmarked like their owners. Maybe the wind will erase them like it does every footprint by morning. But for now, they're real. For now, they matter. Because in a world where everything has been taken from you, your name, your time, your future, what you choose to hold on to is everything. Even if it's only a second. Even if it's only a glance. Even if it's only silence. You hold it like a flame in the dark, and for that one moment, you are more than the dust. You are more than the whip. You are more than forgotten. You are still here. It happens slowly, like all things that are real. A shared piece of bread, one morning half of your already pathetic ration, handed silently to the man beside you when he can't stand long enough to line up. No words. Just a look, a nod, a recognition that hunger is less unbearable when shared. The next day, someone wraps a torn strip of linen around your bleeding hand without asking. Another day, you lift the back end of a cart that's too heavy for one man and don't wait for thanks. It's not charity, it's not kindness, it's survival. It's the quiet math of human connection in a place designed to erase it. You're not building friendships, you're building lifelines out of the few things they haven't taken from you yet. There's no time to talk much, and you wouldn't risk it even if there were. The overseers have ears that can hear anything spoken with too much emotion, but glances those they miss. The little shared nods before a shift starts, the eye rolls at a particularly loud command. The subtle shift of body weight when someone's about to fall, and the guy next to him steps in to brace, pretending it was an accident. These are your people, not by choice, but by consequence. They weren't chosen for you. They were thrown into the same furnace. And yet, here you all are cooked in the same fire, bonded not by love, but by mutual incineration. You don't know all their names. Some don't speak your dialect. Others stop speaking much at all after one too many beatings. But you know them. You know the way the tall one limps a little more when it rains, the way the quiet one carves tiny notches into stone when he thinks no one is watching, the way the youngest one flinches every time someone raises a voice near him, and how everyone else instinctively steps in just slightly closer when that happens. There's an unspoken agreement. You protect what you can. You soften the blow when it's possible. You suffer alone less often. At night, when the heat fades into bitter cold and the stars spill across the sky in silence, the workers settle into a different rhythm. The moans of the injured, the restless shifting on mats too thin to cushion anything, the slow crackle of distant fires that never quite reach you, and then sometimes a hum, a low, soft melody rising out of the dark like smoke. It starts with one voice, barely audible, then another joins, and another, until there's a weaving of sound, loose and trembling, like threads pulled from a frayed blanket. The songs aren't loud. Loud would be dangerous, but they carry. They ripple from one huddled group to the next, each voice adding a piece of memory, of home, of what it used to feel like to be a child tucked into a mat with stories instead of warnings. They don't always have words. Sometimes they're just tone and breath, like the whisper of wind between bricks. But they say everything that's been silenced. They say, I remember where I came from. They say, you are not alone. They say, they haven't broken us yet. Some songs are familiar across language-sold farming chants, prayers disguised as lullabies, work rhythms repurposed into messages of longing. Others are made up on the spot, fragments of melody born out of exhaustion and pain and the desperate need to feel human, if only for the length of a few notes. No one teaches these songs. They pass from voice to voice like secrets, and once sung, they never truly leave. You start to notice how they change with the days. Some nights, the songs are almost cheerful, mocking the overseers, celebrating a shared joke, a rare good meal, a cloud that blocked the sun for 5 whole minutes. Other nights, they are slow and heavy, weighted with grief for someone who didn't wake up, or for someone you saw taken away and know won't return. The songs become the only history you have, the only record of what life felt like beneath the stone. Not the Pharaoh's life, yours, the life of the forgotten. And the singing isn't just for expression. It's strategy. It regulates breath, keeps rhythm during work, distracts from pain. It lifts the mind just far enough out of the body to make the hours a little more bearable. It's a spell cast against despair, a shield woven from harmony. It's not rebellion, not really, but it's also not obedience. It's something older than either. A third path. The music of endurance. You begin to wait for it, to listen for the first hum each night like a child waiting for a bedtime story. Sometimes you hum back, even if your throat is raw, even if you're too tired to hold a tune, because in that moment, you're not alone in your straw bed with your pain. You're part of a chorus of ghosts who haven't died yet. A choir of people who weren't supposed to survive this long and yet keep making music with the only instruments they have left. Their voices, their breath, their will. And maybe the gods aren't listening. Maybe the priests are too busy counting their gold. But you're listening. You all are. And that matters more than anything. Because when everything else has been stripped away, when your name and your rights and your future have been ground into dust, the only thing left is each other. And for as long as the songs keep floating above the camps and the quarries, the system hasn't won. Not entirely. Not yet. The stars in Egypt aren't the same kind you remember from home, if you can even remember what home was. They aren't cold, distant dots on a sky drowning in city light. Here, in this vast and brutal nowhere, the stars are impossibly bright, like the gods poked holes through the night just to watch you crawl. They stretch from horizon to horizon, sharp and quiet, far too numerous to count, each one a silent spectator to your suffering. You find yourself watching them when you can't sleep, which is often, not because you're comfortable your bedding is a frayed mat on the hard-packed earth, and the air is just cold enough to make your joints ache, but because it's the only time the world doesn't ask anything of you. You lie there, back to the ground, face to the stars, and for a moment, you aren't a slave. You aren't a number. You aren't a cog in a machine designed to grind people into monuments. You're just a body beneath a sky so vast it makes your pain feel like a single grain of sand in an endless dune. You begin to feel small in the best way, not worthless, but weightless, unshackled, because the stars don't care who you are, or what you do, or whether the overseer screamed at you today for moving too slow. They don't see your sweat. They don't hear your groans. They just shine, cold and constant, like truth that never asks to be believed. In those moments, you remember things. Things you haven't thought about in weeks, maybe months. Your mother's voice, singing to herself while grinding grain. The sound of water dripping into a ceramic jug. The smell of dates when they're just past ripe. These aren't grand memories. They're not epic stories. They're fragments soft and meaningless to anyone else, but to you, they're everything. They're proof you existed before this. That you were once a child who played in the mud, who dreamed about birds, who believed in things. That even if your name has been forgotten, even if your bones will be lost beneath a wall or tossed in a trench, something in you still remembers what it was like to belong to the world. And somehow, the stars remember you. That's the only way you can describe it. When you stare long enough, when the cold bites into your skin and the silence grows thick enough to swallow your thoughts, you feel something staring back. Not the gods, not the dead. Something older, deeper. A quiet, observing presence that doesn't judge, doesn't punish, doesn't care what class you were born into. It just watches. Maybe it watched when the first stone was laid. Maybe it watched when the first man fell beneath a whip. Maybe it will still be watching long after the last block crumbles into the sand. And in that thought, there is comfort. You may be small, but you are not invisible. The next morning, your dream is interrupted by shouting, as always, but something is different. The air feels heavier, like the desert knows something is about to happen. You're assigned to mud brick duty, nothing glorious, just stacking them into storage near the temple compound. The bricks are still wet, still warm from the sun. They smell of clay and straw and the hands that shaped them. You lift one, then another, then another. The work is monotonous, but your mind drifts. You start to notice the impressions in the bricks. Not the molds or the tool marks, those are everywhere. But fingerprints. Tiny ones. As if a child had touched them before they dried. There's no way to know who they belong to. Maybe a worker's son wandered too close to the forming area. Maybe it was a mother holding her infant as she shaped the clay. The print is shallow, barely there, almost washed away by time. But it stops you, because it's real, because it's human, because somewhere in the layers of enforced silence and backbreaking labor, someone left a trace of life. And once you see one, you start seeing them everywhere. Not just fingerprints, but subtle grooves where someone scratched a mark into a brick's side. A small dent, shaped like a crescent. A thumb smear at the edge of a dried lump. They're not intentional, they're not messages, but they are reminders. The bricks remember. The mud remembers. Not in a conscious way, but in texture, in shape, in the way each one fits into another with the echo of hands that placed them. These bricks have been touched, shaped, lifted, dropped, stacked, and restacked by people who will never be known, but who were here, who breathed, who existed. You run your fingers along one brick and feel the ridges. You try to imagine the person who held it before you. Were they taller? Younger? Did they cry while shaping it? Did they hum a song? Did they believe the work would last forever? Or were they just trying to survive until the next sunrise? The thought overwhelms you. Because, in a world that erases people as easily as footprints in sand, these small marks are defiant. They say, "We were here, not kings, not scribes, not gods, just us, the ones who built everything and were thanked with silence." You keep stacking, one brick at a time. You don't mention what you've seen. But now, every time you pick up a brick, you look for the traces, and when you find one, you press your own thumb into the edge, just softly, just enough to leave something behind. Not because it will be seen, not because it matters, but because in that gesture, you are more than your suffering. You are part of something bigger than pain, bigger than memory, something made not of glory but of dust and hands and the quiet insistence of life. And maybe one day, someone else will touch that brick, and they'll feel your thumbprint, and they'll know that you were real, that you mattered, that you were not just part of the wall, but that the wall, in some small, stubborn way, was also part of you. The overseer doesn't need to speak to control you. His presence alone is enough. You feel it before you see him, the way the laughter dies down, the way backs straighten, the way even the tiredest men suddenly remember how to look busy. He walks like someone who knows that fear works better than a whip, but keeps the whip anyway. Just in case. You don't look him in the eye. No one does. Not because you're afraid of what you'll see, but because you're afraid of what he won't. He won't see a person. He won't see a name, a story, a soul, just a tool, a number, a shadow that obeys. And yet, sometimes, when you risk a glance, you notice something strange. He looks tired. Not in the way you look tired, with cracked lips and a spine that feels like it's been hammered into your body, but a different kind of tired, the kind that seeps from the inside out. His face is always set like stone, but the lines in it aren't all from frowning. Some of them look older, sadder, like maybe, once upon a lifetime ago, he was human too. Maybe he still is, somewhere under all the armor made of commands and silence. You start to wonder what his story is. Not out of empathy, you're far too drained for that kind of generosity, but out of morbid curiosity. Was he always like this? Or was he made into this, brick by brick, the same way you've been reshaped by labor and heat and obedience? Did he earn his position through cruelty, or was he simply the one who didn't die fast enough? Maybe once he had a name that people said with kindness. Maybe he used to hum to himself when he thought no one was listening. Maybe he buried someone once and never really came back from it. You'll never ask, and he'll never tell. That's the arrangement. He gets to survive a little longer, and you get to keep your teeth. But even as you turn away and resume the motion of your day, that thought stays lodged in your mind like a splinter. The idea that even the person holding the whip might be a prisoner too. It doesn't make you hate him less, but it does make the whole system feel more cursed, like a machine that chews up everyone, not just the ones at the bottom. And so you keep moving, because what else is there? The work is endless. The sky doesn't blink. The earth doesn't shift. The blocks never stop needing to be moved. And inside your chest, a small voice gets louder each day. Not a scream, not even a cry, just a whisper. Leave, not escape. You know better than to romanticize that word. Escape is for people with places to run to. Leave is simpler. It's about stepping away, letting go, slipping between the cracks of the world like a breath exhaled too quietly to catch. You start to think about the desert differently, not as your enemy, not as the punishing landscape that burns your skin and sucks the moisture from your bones, but as a place that doesn't ask questions, a place that doesn't yell or demand or judge, a place that simply is. Wide, silent, final. The idea starts as a fleeting thought. During a break, what would happen if I just kept walking? No farewell, no rebellion, no fight, just steps, one after the other, until the camp fades into a blur and the voices behind you become memories instead of orders. You imagine it more often than you admit. You picture the way the sand would feel underfoot hot. Yes, but honest. The way the horizon would rise to meet you, unbothered by your insignificance. There's a freedom in that image that no temple or tomb could offer. No more overseers. No more broken tools. No more pretending you're not already halfway dead inside. Just wind and stars and silence so deep you might finally hear your own thoughts again. But you don't go. Not yet. Because something always stops you. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's the way your body still responds to routine like a reflex you can't unlearn. Maybe it's the boy who shares his last bite of bread with you. Or the old man who hums a song at night that reminds you of your grandmother's voice. Maybe it's the hopius, that dangerous, ridiculous word that something, anything, might still change. That one day, someone will see you not as a shadow but as a person, that your name will matter again. Or maybe you stay because leaving takes strength, and you've spent every ounce of it surviving one more sunrise. Whatever the reason, you don't walk into the desert. Not today. You lift another brick. You endure another shout. You swallow another mouthful of dust. But somewhere inside, the thought remains. Not loud, not urgent, just waiting. A promise made to yourself in a language only the stars and the sand understand. One day, if nothing else, you will walk not to escape, not to win, but simply to leave. And for now, even that thought is a kind of freedom. At night, when the sky finally cools and the stars return to their perch in the infinite above, your mind does what it always does. It slips into dreaming, not sleep, necessarily. Sleep is fickle, sometimes more exhausting than the labor that came before it. But dreaming, that still happens, whether you ask for it or not. And lately, the dream is always the same. You're floating down the Nile, not rowing, not hauling, not straining against the current like you've done in real life more times than you can count. You're just floating, drifting, weightless. There's no whip cracking behind you, no sand in your eyes, no overseer counting your strokes like coins, just water and sky, and the soft rustle of papyrus reeds whispering a lullaby to a man who was never allowed to hear one. You float past palm groves, past carved stone temples where the gods never show up, past villages that never noticed you missing. No one shouts your name. No one waits for you on the shore. And that, somehow, feels like peace. There's no destination. The river doesn't ask questions. It doesn't care where you've been or what you've done. It only moves. Forward. Always. And in the dream, you don't resist. You surrender to the current like a prayer wrapped in silt. You drift and let the Nile carry you somewhere beyond reach. You think maybe, just maybe, this is what freedom feels. Like not running. Not fighting, just letting go. In the real world, of course, the Nile isn't so kind. You know its moods. You've seen its floods drown fields. Its banks split open like wounds after heavy rains. You've watched men disappear beneath its surface, their bodies dragged down by weeds and ghosts. But in the dream, none of that matters. The water is warm, the current gentle. You're not afraid, because in the dream, you're not a laborer, not a slave, not even a man. You're a leaf, a shadow, a whisper of someone who once wanted more. And for once, you're not being pulled by someone else's command. You're being carried by the river itself, which, if nothing else, understands the art of motion without cruelty. And when the dream ends, and you wake up stiff and sore and caked in sweat, part of it lingers. Just a trace. A softness in the edges of your mind that wasn't there before. You hold on to it, even as the sun begins to rise and the barking starts again. You don't speak of it. You don't even fully remember it. But it shapes your day in subtle ways. The way you move with slightly less resistance. The way you stare a few seconds longer at the water when you pass it on a supply run. The way your hands, cracked and bruised, seem for a moment to belong to someone capable of floating, not just lifting. And then the sun returns to its rightful place overhead, and with it, the weight. The kind of weight that isn't just physical but cosmic. It doesn't press down on you so much as crush. The sun in Egypt isn't just heat its authority, it's a second overseer. It rises without fail, looks down with pitiless light, and watches you work like it's the eye of a very judgmental God who doesn't believe in shade. Every breath under its gaze feels like inhaling through cloth. Your lungs don't expand so much as endure. Your skin burns, not in patches but in permanence, and the stench of your own sweat becomes something familiar, almost comforting because it's proof you're still alive. Barely. You learn to count the hours by how deeply your shadow bleeds into the ground, by how dry your tongue gets between water rations, by how quickly your fellow workers stop talking and start grunting, their voices stolen by dehydration and hopelessness. The sun watches all of it. Never blinking, never leaving. It's always there dominating the sky, like it owns you. And maybe it does. After all, it's the reason you can't rest. It's the reason the crops must grow, the bricks must dry, the gods must be worshipped in shining temples. The sun is the foreman of the heavens, and you are its least important servant. But over time, a strange thing happens. The sun stops being your enemy, not because it shows mercy it doesn't, but because you begin to understand its rhythm. You anticipate its wrath. You move in sync with its rage. You learn which rocks to sit behind for a sliver of shade. You know when to close your eyes during a break, so you don't see it mocking you from above. You know how to tilt your body just enough that it burns your left shoulder today and your right tomorrow, giving your skin time to scab and recover. The sun becomes not just a source of torment, but a teacher of endurance, of predictability, of the comfort that even pain can be consistent. And in that consistency, you find something like grace. Not relief, not pleasure, but predictable suffering, which, in your life, is about as close to stability as you'll ever get. You stop fearing the sun's cruelty and start respecting its schedule. It will rise, it will punish, it will set. And in that setting, you find the briefest moment of forgiveness. Because once it dips below the dunes, once the gold turns to orange and then to blue and then to black, the desert exhales, the sky cools, the wind returns, and you are, for a handful of minutes, not being crushed by anything. That's when you remember the dream again. The floating, the stillness, the weightlessness. And even though your body aches and your eyes sting and your stomach feels like a hollow drum, you carry the dream with you into the night. Not because it's real, not because it will save you, but because it's yours. And in a world where everything else has been taken, that might be the only thing they can't touch. The dream, the river, the sun. All part of a story you keep writing in your head, one blistered day at a time. There's a moment small, fleeting, the kind you almost miss when someone calls out across the quarry. You don't react at first. Why would you? People shout all the time here. Orders, threats, names you've never heard and will never learn. But this one is different. This one slices through the heat and the noise and the years, because it's your name. Your name. Not the barked version the overseers use, not the clipped grunt the others throw at you when they're too tired to speak in full sentences. It's your real name. The one you were given before you belonged to a work crew, before you were marked on a ledger, before you were beaten into answering to something less than human. It rolls out soft and unsure, like a question, like a memory trying to find its way home. You freeze. For a second, your legs forget how to move, your hands go slack around the rope, the sun feels further away. Because that sound, it doesn't just call to you, it remembers you. You turn, slowly, like your body is afraid it's being tricked. And there, just past the carts, beyond the dust cloud kicked up by the team dragging limestone, stands a boy. Well, not a boy anymore, but you recognize the eyes. Older, sunburnt, thinner, but it's him. Your cousin, or maybe your brother. You're not sure anymore. It's been too long. The world before this place has faded into myth, but his voice, that was real, that name, it was yours. And for one strange second, you feel like a person again, like someone who mattered once. But the moment doesn't last. The overseer bellows your number, not your name. Just a harsh, guttural code that means get back to work. You flinch. Your cousin, if he even is that, glances away, and just like that, the spell is broken. You're a shadow again, a body among bodies. He moves on. And you do too, because what else can you do? But the damage is done. Something inside you shifts. You go through the rest of the day in a haze, not from heat or hunger, but from memory. It's not the past exactly, it's the idea of the past. The realization that you used to have a name and a life, and people who said that name with love, or at least familiarity. You start whispering it to yourself at night, just to remember how it sounds. At first, it feels like a secret, then it feels like a prayer, and finally, like a wound you keep touching to see if it still hurts. You say it in rhythm with your breathing. You trace it into the dust with your fingertip when no one is looking. Not because you think anyone will ever say it again, but because you will. And as long as you do, part of you still exists outside this place, still matters, still lives. It's a strange thing, dignity. You don't notice it when it's present. You don't sit around thinking, I am dignified. It doesn't strut. It doesn't announce itself. But you feel its absence like hunger sharp, consuming, familiar. And yet, sometimes, in the smallest moments, it comes back. Not as a flood, but as a trickle. Like the day you found that bird. A tiny thing, wing bent, hopping hopelessly near the edge of a trench. The kind of creature most would ignore. No food. No value. Just a mistake made of feathers. But something in you stopped. Something reached down. You scooped it up carefully, slowly, hands gentler than you thought they could be anymore. And for those few minutes while you cupped that fragile heartbeat, while you looked for a safe patch of shade, while you watched it flutter, pause, and finally hop away, you felt something you hadn't in years. Not strength, not power, but care. You cared about something. Not because you were told to, not because it served a purpose, but because it was alive. And so were you. No one saw. No one would have understood if they had. But you did. And that's what mattered. You went back to work with the same tools, the same blisters, the same sun overhead. But you carried that moment like a hidden coin. A small, quiet piece of worth no one could take. Because, for that one act saving something weaker than yourself, when you had nothing to spare, you weren't just surviving. You were choosing. And choice, in a world designed to strip it from you, is a rebellion all its own. After that, you notice more. The way someone else steps in to help a man who stumbles, the way another sneaks a pebble from the worksite, polishes it, and leaves it on a shrine made of broken bricks. Not for gods, not for glory, just because it felt right. These aren't big gestures. They're not going to change the world. But they're reminders. That beneath the sweat and the silence, beneath the layers of ash and numbness, there's still something human left. And that maybe, just maybe, it's enough to keep going. Because dignity, when everything else is gone, isn't loud. It's not a speech or a statue. It's a hand reaching for a bird, a name whispered into the dark, a breath taken not because it was granted, but because you chose to take it. And sometimes that's all you need. One breath, one name, one act of care. To remember that you are still a person, and that even here, buried under the weight of empires and gods, you are still yours. The temples loom above you, carved from the bones of the earth. Massive and solemn and indifferent. They rise like mountains built by human hands like yours, trembling, blistered, perpetually stained with limestone dust and sweat. You drag a cart of supplies to the rear of one of these stone sanctuaries. And as you pass beneath the columns, you feel something shift. Not outside nothing changes there. The overseers still bark, the carts still groan. But inside you, something quiet stirs. You pause, just a beat too long. Just enough for someone to shout your number again, but not before you run your hand along the base of the wall. The stone is warm, almost humming. The carvings etched into its surface are immaculate, untouched by the messiness of the lives that built it. You've worked on these temples before. You know the precision, the impossibility of it. You've helped lift the lintels, align the blocks, polish the surfaces until they shine like the gods are expected to. You've been part of the human machine that turns raw stone into something worthy of divine attention. And the irony never fades. You aren't allowed to pray inside. You are the hands, the labor, the breath behind the monument, but you're not welcome within its shadows. The priests may sprinkle water, chant verses, wave incense, but they don't see you. Not really. You're the scaffolding that got them here. Now that the walls are up, your part is over. Still, there are rumors. Always rumors. Whispers that the gods see the laborers even if the priests don't. That a god's gaze isn't fooled by linen robes or fancy rituals. That when you leave behind a little offeringa stone, a broken bead, a thread from your tattered rappet doesn't go unnoticed. You laugh when you hear it, at first. It sounds like a bedtime story for grown men too tired to argue, but then you start noticing the stones. Not the big ones, the little ones, tucked into corners of the temple base, nestled between blocks. They don't belong there. No tool could have wedged them in. They were placed. Intentionally. Carefully. Like someone leaving a signature where no one was supposed to leave anything. You start leaving your own. Nothing big. Just a pebble. Just a tiny, smooth piece of river-worn rock that you found near the Nile. You slide it into a crack near the back wall of the temple, where the priests won't notice, where the overseers won't care. And for some reason, it feels like a sacred act. Not because you believe the gods will notice, but because you did. You chose. You acted. In a life where nearly everything is dictated what you do, when you sleep, how you suffer this one small defiance feels enormous. You start looking forward to it. Each day, you scan the ground for a stone that feels right. Not too big, not too sharp. Something simple. Something that might pass for ordinary to everyone else but holds meaning for you. And when you place it, you whisper nothing. No prayer, no plea, just presence. I was here. You don't need to ask for favor. You don't expect justice. You're not foolish. But the simple act of leaving a piece of yourself behind a token of your invisible existence becomes its own kind of sacred. And over time, you begin to believe that maybe, just maybe, these stones are noticed. Not by gods in the clouds, but by the temple itself. Because if anything is alive in this world of dead rules and hollow rituals, it's the stone. It remembers. It absorbs everything. The pressure of your back as you rest against it during breaks. The heat of your palms as you brace yourself mid-lift. The shiver of a chisel scraping it too deep. The quiet thud of your offering sliding into place. The stone does not forget. And maybe, through the weight of your silence, through the burden of your suffering, the walls are listening. So one night, when no one is looking, you go further. You walk to the edge of the compound, where the newer temple stones are still being stacked, unfinished and unblessed. You find a spot behind a half-laid wall, kneel, and place your offering this time. It's more than a stone. It's a tiny knot of string from the wrap that once belonged to your brother. He's gone now, died in the quarry last season. No one said his name. No one marked his passing. But you remember. You place the string in a crevice and press it deep. You whisper his name once, just once, and step away. And suddenly, the temple doesn't feel quite so hollow. You don't tell anyone. These offerings are your secret, your story carved not in hieroglyphs but in the small, invisible corners of the sacred. And you wonder when this temple stands for centuries, when tourists from worlds unimaginable walk through its halls, will they feel it? Will they sense that something human, something wounded and stubborn and real, was here first? Before the gods were invoked, before the kings took credit. You hope so, you doubt it, but still you hope. And when the sun rises the next day, and the work resumes, and the overseer starts his rounds, your body is just as sore, your stomach just as hollow, but something in you feels different. Like the stone remembers, like the silence, at least, has started listening back. You carry that thought through every task, every shouted command, every endless hour. Because now, you're not just building a temple, you're leaving a trace. And even if no one else ever sees it, you do. And that, in a world that demands your erasure, is the most sacred offering you can give. The desert doesn't keep records. It doesn't carve your name into stone. It doesn't hold funerals. But it remembers. It remembers everything. The sand isn't just sand, it's a living archive, ground from bones and time and footsteps no one bothered to count. You can walk the same stretch 1,000 times and still feel the way it shifts underfoot differently each day, like it's adjusting itself for your grief, like it knows today hurts in a new direction. Your footprints, they vanish in hours blown smooth by the wind, scoured clean by a sun that wants no evidence left behind. But the sand still remembers. You start to believe it, because even as your tracks disappear, even as your back bends and your voice fades, something in this place notices. And that something, whatever it is, isn't human. It isn't a god. It's something older, patient, immense. It doesn't offer justice or comfort or revenge. It offers memory. It holds the shape of what was, for a while, even if it doesn't preserve it for anyone else. And in that quiet, granular record-keeping, there's a strange kind of comfort. You begin to talk to it not with words, because there's never time or safety for that but with motion, with the way you press your heel deeper into the earth on the walk to the site, with the way you drag your fingers through it during a stolen second of rest, with the small patterns you etch absently while waiting for a cart to be reloaded. They don't last. You know they don't. But still, you make them. Because maybe the sand remembers not in permanence, but in repetition. Maybe it doesn't store your message, it stores the fact that you had one, that you were here, even if no one else cared. And after a while, you stop needing your marks to last. That's the trick. You start to let go of the idea that proof is necessary for something to be real. You don't need your name to be carved. You don't need your face on a stele. You don't need a priest to say you mattered. You were here. The sand knows. You know. That's enough. The need for recognition softens. You begin to accept the transient, the temporary. You realize that maybe what you're building, these walls, these pyramids, these temples, they'll last forever, but they'll do so without remembering you. And maybe that's okay. Because while they were built to endure, you were built to feel. And that matters too, even if it doesn't last. This acceptance doesn't come all at once. It arrives slowly, like erosion in reverse. You stop fighting the rhythm of your day, not because you've given up, but because you've learned how to move with the current instead of against it. You still hurt. You still bleed. But you don't waste time resenting it. You begin to take breaks with less guilt. You close your eyes during the noon heat and let your thoughts drift instead of clutching them tightly. You let your arms swing looser when you walk. You allow yourself to breathe not deep, because the dust still chokes but fuller. You don't savor the pain, but you stop flinching at it. You begin to understand that resistance is not always strength. Sometimes surrender is the harder, braver thing. You're not surrendering to the overseers, not to the pharaoh, not even to death. You're surrendering to the flow, to the moment, to the knowledge that this is what life is now, and if it's going to be this way, you will live it fully, not just endure it like a thing waiting to break. You find peace in strange places, in the way your body settles into a rhythm while lifting bricks, no longer fighting every motion but sliding into them with muscle memory that almost feels like grace. In the way your fellow workers start syncing with your steps, your pace, your breath. You don't speak. You don't need to. There's a shared stillness in the labor, a unity that doesn't require conversation. You start to feel like you're not just surviving alongside them, you're surviving with them, not as a crowd, but as a pulse, a wave of effort, a movement with direction. And as this calm grows, so does your awareness of the world around you. You begin to notice things you missed before. The delicate skeleton of a beetle trapped in amber sand, the way the horizon turns lavender just before nightfall, the fact that some stars rise exactly where others set, like the sky is playing its own quiet game of balance. You start seeing the beauty not as something that's meant for others, for the priests or nobles or gods, but as something you get to witness. Not as a gift, but as a right. You begin to cherish these sights like secrets. Small offerings the world makes to you in exchange for your silence. And for the first time in years, you accept them with open eyes. You no longer curse the sun the way you used to. You greet it with the same tired nod you give to your tools. It's not your friend, but it's part of the rhythm now. It rises, you rise. It burns, you burn. It sets, and something inside you cools just enough to remember what softness felt like. You no longer hope for escape, but you no longer dread tomorrow either. You've made peace with now, and in that peace, something unexpected grows. Not joy, not happiness, but stillness, a sacred kind of fatigue, a clarity made of dust and breath. You stop trying to prove you're more than this life. You start just being in it, not as a number, not as a slave, but as someone who knows the value of a breeze, the taste of silence, the soft grace of having made it through one more day. You lie down in your corner of the camp, the ground still warm from the day's sun, and close your eyes without fear. You don't pray. You don't wish. You just breathe, in and out. And with every breath, you remind the desert and yourself that you're still here. Quiet, steady, enough. Time folds in on itself here. It doesn't stretch forward in a straight line. It coils circling back, swallowing its own tail, bending like the spine of a man who's carried too many bricks without enough rest. You lose track of days, of seasons, of how long you've been here. The sun rises, the work starts, the sun falls, the pain persists. That's all. You begin to wonder if time even matters. If it ever did, you count your life not in years, but in injuries, in bruises that fade and return like guests overstaying their welcome, in sunrises survived and sunsets earned, in the moments when the overseer forgets to shout, and the silence stretches just long enough to remember what it feels like to have a thought that isn't about enduring. You start feeling old. Not in your body, you were old there by your third week, but in your soul. Ancient, even. Like your spirit has aged 10,000 years in the span of one. You feel the weight of every laborer who came before you. You feel the dust of their bones in the cracks of your skin. Hear their whispers in the creak of your joints. When you touch the stone, you swear you can feel echoes not of the gods it was meant for, but of the hands that shaped it. Your hands, their hands, no difference. Just a lineage of forgotten lives layered on top of each other like limestone strata. And yet, you keep going, not because you expect a reward or because you believe it'll end. You keep going because the act of continuing is all that's left. You lift because that's what your body knows now. You walk because stopping feels more foreign than pain. You breathe because breath is the last ritual that hasn't been taken from you. Each motion becomes sacred in its repetition. Each task, a mantra. There is peace in the rhythm. A grim, cracked peace, yes, but peace nonetheless. You don't smile when you find it, but you do stop scowling. You let the rhythm carry you. You let the work fill the void left behind by the person you used to be. And in the most bizarre twist of all, the exhaustion becomes holy. Not revered by anyone else, not praised in stone or text, but sanctified by repetition. You begin to understand why monks and mystics speak of asceticism, of self-denial, of embracing suffering to reach something deeper. Not because suffering is noble, but because, in the absence of everything else, pleasure, comfort, identity, something true is left behind. Something raw, stripped of ego. A version of you that isn't performing, isn't wishing, isn't trying to be anything more than exactly what you are in this moment. Breath and flesh and motion. When the pain comes, you greet it. Not with gratitude, but with acknowledgement. You name it. You place it in your mental architecture, like a support beam. There's the ache in your shoulder from yesterday's hauling, the throb in your hip from last month's fall, the dull pressure behind your eyes from too many hours in the sun without water. Each pain is part of you now. They don't scream anymore. They hum, a chorus of suffering that you've made peace with, because to rage against it would be like raging against the wind. You no longer measure your strength by how much you can lift. You measure it by how much you can endure without breaking, how many sunrises you can greet without bitterness, how many nights you can fall asleep on stone and wake up still willing to move. You learn that sacredness isn't in temples. It's in your ability to keep going when no one is watching, when no one will ever thank you, when your name will never be remembered. That's devotion, not to a god, to life itself, to the quiet, ceaseless act of surviving on your own terms, even when you have no choice. And maybe that's the greatest miracle. Not that you've lasted this long, but that you've found meaning in the lasting. That the exhaustion which once crushed you now carries you forward. That your pain, which once screamed, has become a song. Not a pretty one, not one you'd hum in polite company, but a song nonetheless. One only you know the words to. One that fills your chest as you walk the same path again, lift the same block again, feel the same sun again. And in that song, in that rhythm, in that sacred fatigue, you find something close to freedom. Not the freedom of escape, the freedom of knowing that no matter what they take, this, your breath, your steps, your persistence still belongs to you. You run your hand along the temple wall, this wall you've polished, carved, bled against for years, and you wonder, for just a heartbeat, if it feels sorrow. The stone is smooth, cool in the fading heat, worn to near perfection by your hands and those of others like you. You trace the edges of the glyphs with your fingertip, and for a moment you imagine them reacting, shuddering, weeping. You picture tears bleeding from the eyes of Horus, or trickling down the chin of some eternally smiling pharaoh etched in divine arrogance. But the wall does not weep. Of course it doesn't. It's a wall. You've known colder things. Still, there's something about its stillness that makes your bones ache more deeply. You've laid your grief into this structure over years of labor, hoping the stone would remember what you were never allowed to say. It hasn't spoken back, but neither has it forgotten. It stands, implacable, in silence so deep, it becomes sacred. You're older now. Not in the way years measure, but in the way sand wears stone. You feel it in your joints, in the way your spine settles into a curve that no stretching can fix, in the way your hands tremble when the wind picks up, as if your body knows instinctively what more damage is coming. And yet, you are here. You are still building, still moving. And now you lift the final stone, the last one. Not of the project, of course. That will go on long after your dust. But for you, this is your last block, the final gesture in a long, silent symphony of sweat and sorrow. The stone is heavier than the others. Not physically, spiritually. It carries every name you were forced to forget, every kindness never spoken aloud, every whispered song shared between laborers at dusk. You don't rush. You place it carefully, deliberately. You let your hands linger longer than usual, feel the vibration of your own breath against its weight. And when it settles into its slot, snug and exact like it was always meant to be there, something in you exhales for the first time in years. You step back, not because there's more to do, but because for once there isn't. You've done it. You've survived another day. You've carried your burden from one end of eternity to the other and laid it down in stone. You've been the silence between hammers, the shadow behind scaffolds, the breath that kept the gods' houses rising. And now, in this final motion, something shifts. Not around you. Nothing in this place ever changes, but within you. That night, the stars are especially bright. They glitter like someone shook the sky loose and spilled light across the heavens just for you. You lie down outside the workers' camp, not because there isn't space inside, but because you want to feel the sand under your back one more time. It cradles you not soft, not kind, but honest. You stare up, eyes barely open, lungs slow, chest rising with the same rhythm that's carried you through every punishment, every praise, every unnoticed mercy. You think about the bird you once saved, the brick with the child's fingerprint, the pebble you left at the temple base. Small things, forgotten things, but they're yours. The wind picks up, gentle, almost tender. It rustles your hair, cools your cheeks. The sky turns, and the desert turns with it, and you finally stop turning with them. Your breath slows. Your hands go still. You close your eyes. Not in pain, not in defeat, just in rest. For once, real rest. The kind that isn't stolen or interrupted. You sleep beneath the dunes. Not in a tomb, not in a grave. Just as you are in the open, under the stars, wrapped in sand and silence. And the stars sing. Not loudly, not with words, but with a presence, a hum that dances in the space between life and legend. They carry your breath upward. They whisper your name in a language older than hieroglyphs, one that no priest can twist and no pharaoh can claim. You don't disappear. You become part of the sky's memory, a shimmer in the night story. And that's it. That's how it ends. Not with trumpets, not with tragedy, but with peace, with one last stone, placed right where it belongs. And maybe, just maybe, with the quiet knowledge that everything you built Thievery scar, every breath, every whispered joke under your breath when the overseer's back was turned meant something. And hey, if you made it this far, congratulations. You've just spiritually survived a full day as a slave in ancient Egypt. Welcome to the club. The benefits are non-existent, the hours are eternal, but the company's honest. Don't expect a pension. Expect dust in your sandals and sarcasm in your soul. Now go lie down, hydrate your soul with sleep, and dream of floating down the Nile with a crocodile that minds its own business. You've earned it. Good night, builder of impossible things. The sand remembers you. Even if history doesn't